Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Tabletop Tavern Tips. Today we are back, and we are back with part 2 of our Problem Player series. This week, as I'm sure you've seen from the thumbnail, we are joined by the one and only CritCrab to discuss 5 more problem players in your D&D games. Just like last time, we're going to have little clips where we discuss solutions to these problem players, because, you know, on RPG Horror Stories, we do try to cover solutions, but I can only do so much with a 1-minute analysis per story. I think you guys already know the drill, so without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so let's start off with the Instigator. The Instigator is one that a lot of people think of as really, really bad, and honestly, I can't really blame you for that. When the Instigator is bad, they are really bad. But often the Instigator is simply a player who's taking the freedom given by their DM a little bit too far. Now, of course, let's quickly define what an Instigator is. An Instigator is where your murder hobo types fall in a lot of the time. People who are instigating things at the table, usually things that are unfun for the dungeon master and the players. Stuff like killing guards, stealing loot from other players, generally screwing around and making the game unfun. Now, of course, screwing around, let's make this clear, screwing around is part of Dungeons & Dragons, but the Instigator crosses the line when they're making the game less fun for everyone else. That is the key to pretty much all of these problem players. Now, let's go back to what I said earlier. How bad is the Instigator really? Now, I do think this is a problem that needs to be addressed at your D&D game if it is causing issues for your party. All issues need to be addressed. That's what you do with problems, otherwise they fester. But I do think the Instigator is one that isn't as bad as many others.
One of my first and best players I've ever had hit that exact patch, and I could tell. I was just like, she isn't trying to ruin the game. She's just having fun. This is she's just, going crazy. But it got to the point where I was like, look, if her character doesn't face consequences now, it's going to get somehow worse than this.
Now, we'll address the really bad Instigators later, but for now, let's talk about the ones that are just taking that freedom a little far. I think the best approach is to simply, like CritCrab said, number 1, establish that this world has consequences. This is something that you should be doing from the get-go. D&D is a living, breathing world. It's not like Skyrim, where 99% of the time you can screw around and basically get away with whatever you want because you're the invincible dragonborn with command prompts in the game. You can do whatever. But in Dungeons & Dragons, the DM is running a living world a lot of the time, and the world reacts to your actions. Your actions have consequences, and I think that is a big thing in preventing random instigatory behavior. When people and players understand that their actions have consequences, they will often cease instigatory behavior. They won't kill random people because they understand that if they do that, the guards will come after them and they won't be able to participate in quests, blah 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 blah. Now, of course, this isn't going to solve every issue. Out-of-game talk is another good way to establish this. If you establish early on that, hey, we're playing a really story-driven campaign, try to create characters that are living in this world. Try not to instigate random events just because you want to be chaotic. Establishing that early on is another big thing. Out-of-game talk usually stops this kind of behavior. But again, all of this is usually. You may have an instigator even after putting in all of those measures, like we always say. So, how do you stop it when it's happening at the game, at the table, sessions into your campaign? Well, I think that, again, one-on-one conversation is key. We talked about one-on-one conversation a lot in the last video, and here, once again, it is important. Establish with this player, once again, hey, I understand that you want to make decisions in this game, and I think that that is great. Freedom to make decisions is part of Dungeons & Dragons. But the decisions that you are making right now are really hurting the game instead of helping it. The decisions you make should make the game more fun for the other players and for myself as the Dungeon Master. I'm finding it really difficult to run the game, and I want you to continue to make decisions. I don't want you to be stuck to a railroad, but at the same time, I want the game to be fun for everyone else. Once you reveal that to a person, a lot of the time, they will curtail their behavior. Now, of course, there are absolutely instigators out there who just want to ruin the fun for others because that is their source of fun. I don't think this is the majority of people by any means, but these people are out there, they do exist, and I'm not going to ignore that, especially since just recently I encountered that kind of player in another game. I was playing an online game, and I was running through a dungeon with a team, and when I got to the end of the dungeon, I was about to kill the boss and collect the loot with the group, and they kicked me. And I didn't get the kill credit, I didn't get any loot, I just wasted all my time with that, and I'm not gonna lie guys, that really, really hurt. Some people just get a kick out of ruining the fun for others, and that really sucks. I have a very short fuse when it comes to that sort of behavior, and I think you should as well. Somebody who's going out of their way to ruin a game, they're not somebody who should stay at that game for very long. But, once again, I don't think the majority of people are like that. A candid conversation will usually solve this issue. The Spotlight Hog is definitely a problem player in many, many D&D games. A lot of us come to D&D with the mindset of the stories that we read in books or watch on film. Books and movies with one central main character. And many of us go into D&D and kind of steamroll other players, especially more extroverted players. Sometimes even DMs can be Spotlight Hogs if they have a DMPC in their campaign that's taking up too much of the focus. We read so many of those stories. So how do you prevent this? Well, I think that, once again, when you're playing with new players especially, new players will often go in with that book, movie mindset of one central main character. Or new players will go in without roleplay experience and will understand that when they are steamrolling other players, it can really hurt the game. Some people don't even understand that they're steamrolling at all. They're just talking the way they normally talk, and other more introverted players aren't getting a chance to speak. That is completely normal. A lot of people don't do this with malicious intent, just like the Instigator from before. So, I think, especially with new players, establishing early on that, hey, this is a team game. We are all playing together. Make sure that other people at the table are getting a chance to talk. Make sure that you talk yourself. Experience the game. You want to be a part of the story, but I want to make sure that everyone at this table is having a good time and everyone is participating. Do this especially if you know your players, and you know for a fact that some people are more extroverted than others. Establishing this early on can really, really help out. Now, make sure not to shame people. Don't shame people out of role-playing. That is really, really bad.
When you're role-playing, you're really like putting yourself out there. You're being a little bit vulnerable, and that's why
it feels a little bit more personal.
It feels like a personal attack on them. It really does.
Roleplay can feel really personal. There's nothing really you can do about it. People are putting themselves out there. They're making themselves vulnerable. So you do need to be a little bit delicate with how you handle the Spotlight Hog. Establish that there's nothing wrong with their roleplay inherently. What they are doing is good. Engaging in the game is something that we want as Dungeon Masters, that we want as players. We want people to be engaged, but we just want everyone to be engaged. And CritCrab has a really great way of presenting this issue to the Spotlight Hog.
What I've always found works for me personally, I read this in a book somewhere, but it's replacing the word but with and. You know, it's like you said earlier, hey, I really like that you're role-playing, you're doing a really good job stepping into your character, and if we could get the other, characters, the other players to come out of their shell a bit more, give them a bit more leg room so that they can also experience the game in this way, I think that would be amazing. And then follow it up with another compliment.
That's so good. Seriously, that little spiel is perfect if you want to establish what's right and what's wrong in their role-playing. I think that is absolutely perfect. And I think that's a great way to stop spotlight hogging behavior, especially when it's unintentional. Now, of course, if it's intentional, which again, I think is very rare, but if it's intentional, I don't really know if there's much you can do about that. When people go into D&D with the goal to be the main character, that is a problem. Now, of course, it could be a misunderstanding, a misinterpretation of what Dungeons & Dragons is, but if people are being stubborn about their main character syndrome, then, again, removal from the game may be the only solution. Don't like that solution because we want everyone to play this game. We want people to experience D&D, but if they're ruining the game for other players, then you may not have a choice. But like I said with the Instigator, I don't think that's the majority of people. I think that once again, a simple conversation establishing how roleplay works in a group setting, establishing that will curtail this problem in your Dungeons & Dragons games. Alright. This one's rough. The other two, there's like a spectrum, and the vast majority of people fall on the lower end of the spectrum where, when you're an Instigator, when you're a Spotlight Hog, it's usually unintentional. Here, I don't think it's unintentional. When you are cheating, and it sucks. I do not understand cheaters in Dungeons & Dragons for the life of me. Cheating in D&D, in my opinion, is one of the silliest things you could possibly do. There's no competitive element to Dungeons and Dragons, or at least there's no competitive element to the vast majority of D&D games. D&D is meant to be cooperative, even with the Dungeon Master. The Dungeon Master is playing the bad guys, and you're still cooperating with the rest of the party in a way. You're working together to build an engaging story.
I would say has the clearest double edge, because on one hand, they care about your game enough to cheat in it. On the other hand, they are caring way too much to the point where they would cheat. And it's like, okay.
How you handle the cheater, that is up to you. I implement the good old-fashioned 2 or 3 strike rule. The first time, talk to the player outside of game. Try not to essentialize them. Just because they cheated once doesn't mean that they are a cheater or they are a terrible person. Why they cheated is beyond me, but maybe they got nervous that session or they really didn't want their character to die. Who knows? But just tell them and establish that, look, cheating is not good. Don't say that they are not good. Say that the thing they're doing is not good. Tell them not to do it again. And if you catch them doing it again, this is what I do. Call it out in front of the rest of the table. I know the first time you pull them aside, you make it one-on-one. But the second time, but the third time, look, I'm calling it out right there at the table. Nothing extreme, nothing mean, just saying, hey, I saw you pick up that dice before it landed and tell me it's a natural 20. I don't buy that. Please re-roll. Doing something like that will hopefully curtail. But if they're doing this multiple times, honestly, the second, the third time, I'm considering removing them from the game. This is clearly a player who doesn't respect the table or you as a dungeon master. They are cheating. They're lying to the rest of the table about their dice rolls for a reason that is absolutely beyond me. And of course, it really ruins the fun of the game when you have somebody who can just push a win button whenever they want.
All the best D&D stories I have, the coolest stories, right? They always spring from a failure or something goes wrong, right?
Yeah.
And then they have to work their way out of it.
So yeah, that's why I think cheaters need to be handled fast and quick in your D&D games. First time, I think you should give them warning. Second, third time, you might need to take a bit more of a further approach, aka, unfortunately, removal from the table. I'm gonna be honest, guys, I don't think the Power Gamer is a problem player at all. It is a player that can be a problem in certain D&D games, and let's just cover that real quick. The Power Gamer is mostly a logistical issue. You as a dungeon master are running a game, and you have one player who is just the dam holding back all the monsters. They are by far the most godly, powerful person at the table, and everyone else is sort of chump change compared to them. They don't feel like heroes, and you as a dungeon master are having trouble building encounters around this one godly build. That is where the problem lies. If you have a full group of Power Gamers and a DM who knows how to DM for those Power Gamers, then, I think that can be a really, really great time. But if you have one Power Gamer in a group of normal player characters, it can be kind of a struggle to balance the game around that.
The Power Gamer is at his worst at a table of new players. New players who are just getting into the game. Maybe they want to try some combat because that's the quickest and easiest attraction of the game.
And then you have the one Power Gamer who just crushes it.
Yeah, one Power Gamer, he's he's spending 15 minutes on his turn outlining all of his stats and chain combo abilities.
So what do you do? Well, I think Power Gamers are honestly some of the more experienced players in this game. A lot of Power Gamers have been playing for a while, and I think that they will understand the issue if you present it to them. Simply explaining, hey, look, you've beaten this game. Essentially, you are the most powerful thing here. I cannot beat your build, and I think the other player characters are kind of getting left behind. Can we adjust some things to bring you more in line with the rest of the party? I think 99% of the time, they will say okay and be alright with that, because a lot of Power Gamers are experienced. They understand. A lot of Power Gamers are dungeon masters in themselves, and they will understand this sort of thing. Now, of course, I do want to say right now that not every table is going to be like this. Some tables, maybe many tables, are going to be okay with one player character being godly powerful compared to everyone else. And you know what? That's great. But if your table does have an issue with that, if your table does not want one player to be more powerful than everyone else, then you need to talk about the issue. Maybe together, maybe one-on-one. I think either way works in this case, just because of how honestly mundane I feel like the issue is. But yeah, it won't be mundane for long if you let the problem fester. This one is one that I do not like, to say the least, and one that is surprisingly common: the control freak. The control freak are your super railroady DMs or your forced leadership position players, the ones that are constantly telling the party what to do, even for arbitrary reasons. I posted this to a D&D group I was in on Discord, and I got 2 people who are like, oh my god, that skirt is so impractical. How is she supposed to fight in that skirt and in those tights? Like, that is so ridiculous, so absurd. Controlling what characters wear, the way characters talk, controlling everything about how the game is played. Sometimes control freak players can also be a real hindrance to their dungeon master, like an extreme version of the critic from the last video, constantly berating their dungeon master and wanting them to DM in other styles. This one is one that you need to catch in the bud. Having a player who is constantly controlling what other people do in a game where freedom is a key aspect, that can be really, really hurtful, especially when it's a player to another player. But also, let's not underestimate those railroading DMs. We read so many horror stories about those for a reason. Railroads that are way too tight, way too restrictive, they really suck, honestly. They really hurt the game. They make it so unfun for the players, especially if the DM establishes that this is like an open world where you can do whatever. If the DM doesn't establish that their campaign is linear, then having a surprise railroad controlling everywhere you go can really hurt. Just look at the airship story as a great example. Nip this one in the bud. Talk to your DM, talk to that player, tell them what they're doing is hurting the rest of the table. Now again, just like we said with, I believe, the cheater, don't essentialize. Don't tell them that you're like a bad person because you're doing this. Just tell them what they're doing is bad, because maybe they have good intentions or maybe they just don't trust other players. I mean, this could definitely happen if you're playing online with people that you don't know. Now, of course, I still think that it's bad, but that is a reasonable reason behind control freak behavior.
They just, unfortunately, they just don't have much faith in the rest of the party and their understanding, so they really do just need to step in and take control. And that's like the best case scenario, though.
But that's the only best case scenario. So yeah, don't essentialize. Talk in a civil way and make sure to establish that this sort of control freak thing is not fun for the rest of the players. Now, railroading DMs are the more common control freak player, and again, I don't like ganging up, so talk to the rest of the party and then pick somebody to like represent the party and go to the DM and talk about the problem. If you gang up on your dungeon master, it can feel really hostile, but sending one person to do it can make it a lot more of a civil discussion. Bring up the issue of the railroad and talk to your DM about it. Tell them what's wrong with their campaign design right now, and explain that you and the rest of the players want the freedom to do more in this game. Of course, it might not work, and I really do not recommend sticking it out with a control freak player or a control freak DM. They just really, in my opinion, suck the fun out of what makes D&D enjoyable. This imagination game where you can do so much, where you don't need to think inside the box. Having someone control your every decision is just, it's just not enjoyable. Honestly, it's not enjoyable in general, having someone control your every decision. So yeah, I don't recommend sticking it out. But hopefully you can solve this issue if you encounter it in your games. Talk to your DM, talk to that player, talk to them and make sure that they understand that control is not something that makes D&D fun. Thank you so much to CritCrab for joining me on today's video. If you're not already subscribed to his channel, go check it out. It is linked in the cards and in the description. If you want to see the full uncut version of the interview, it will be on Spotify and on this YouTube channel this Sunday. If you guys enjoyed this video, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, then you can check out our RPG horror story series where we cover the best of the worst of Dungeons & Dragons. And while you're there in the cards, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content right as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own tips or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment more problems to let me know you made it to the end of the video. And listen, like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you all next time. Farewell.